Judith Caldwell built the gate to make sure nobody could get around it. Steel frame, electronic card reader, concrete bollards sunk deep on both sides. Then she put a $25 toll on the fire road crossing my property and told me, "Every road in this community pays its way, even yours." There was just one problem. The road wasn't hers. My grandfather had built it across our 12 acres, decades before Ridgeline Estates existed, and the county had designated it for emergency fire access. But Judith had a board majority and HOA attorney, and eventually a professional survey, claiming the boundary had somehow moved. She was so confident she could make her version official that she ignored everything I put in front of her. The deed, the plat map, 15 years of maintenance records, and one warning she should never have ignored. Because when the clubhouse finally caught fire, 16 engines arrived, and the gate Judith had built to stay closed did exactly that. But to understand how it got that far, I need to go back to where that road started. My grandfather bought those 12 acres in 1962 with cash from 20 years of union ironwork. Raw hillside land on the western edge of what would eventually become Ridgeline Estates. Nobody wanted it back then. Too steep, too brushy, too far from the highway. But Grandpa Morrison saw one thing everybody else missed if a fire ever came through those hills. The valley below had no way out to the west. One road in, one road out. So he cut a gravel road straight through his parcel, connecting County Road 9 on the ridge down to the valley floor. Half a mile of switchbacks, wide enough for heavy trucks. He graded it himself, laid gravel, put in 2 culverts for drainage. He never charged anyone a dime. "This road stays open," he told my father. "That's what it's for." 20 years later, a developer built Ridgeline Estates in the valley. 200 homes, one main entrance off the highway to the east. My grandfather's land wasn't part of the deal. His 12 acres sat untouched on the western edge, and the fire road stayed on his deed. The developer actually noted it on the subdivision plat, private road emergency access. The county fire authority added it to their emergency access route map the same year. When I inherited the land, I inherited the road. Every spring I'd hire a crew to regrade the gravel. Every few years I'd replace the culverts. I kept the invoices in a filing cabinet. 15 years of maintenance receipts, all paid out of my own pocket. Nobody from the HOA ever offered to split the cost. Nobody ever questioned whose road it was. That changed when Judith Caldwell showed up. She won the HOA presidency 2 years ago, ran unopposed. Nobody else wanted the job. Former real estate office manager. The kind of person who memorized Robert's Rules of Order and quoted them at you like scripture. Within her first 6 months, she tripled the number of aesthetic violations. Fined a guy for having the wrong shade of beige on his mailbox post. Sent a certified letter to an 80-year-old widow about a garden gnome. She ran that board like a toll booth. Everything cost something, and the money always seemed to flow toward whatever project had her name attached to it. I stayed out of it. My parcel predated the subdivision. My CC&Rs didn't bind me to HOA board votes. Judith's little kingdom stopped at my property line, or so I thought. 6 months before the fire, I got a call from my neighbor Ray. "You need to come see what's happening on your fire road." I drove out there expecting maybe a fallen tree, maybe some kids dumping trash. What I found was a construction crew pouring concrete footings on both sides of the road. My road on my land, without a phone call, a letter, or a knock on my door. I tracked down the foreman. He showed me the work order signed by Judith Caldwell, HOA president, authorizing installation of a community access management system. That's a toll gate on a fire road. I drove straight to the next board meeting. Judith was at the head table, gavel in front of her 4 board members, flanking her like cabinet secretaries. The room had maybe 30 residents, most of them checking their phones, ready to leave. I stood up during public comments. "You're building a gate on my fire road, on my property, without my permission." Judith didn't blink. The board voted 4-1 to approve the community access management system. "It's on HOA land. You don't have a say." "It's on my land. It's on my deed." She let out this little laugh, not loud, just enough to let the room know she thought I was being ridiculous. "Your deed is 60 years old, Mr. Morrison. Things change." 2 board members shifted in their chairs. The other 2 stared at their folders. Nobody said a word. 2 weeks later, the gate was finished. Steel frame electronic card reader, concrete bollards sunk 3 feet deep on both sides, so nothing wider than a bicycle could squeeze around it. Professional job, permanent. Judith sent every household in Ridgeline Estates a notice on HOA letterhead. Effective immediately, use of the community access road required a $25 per trip fee. Revenue would fund community improvements, specifically a new pickleball court at the Clubhouse. She sent me the same notice, $25 to drive on the road my grandfather built with his own hands, on land my family had owned for 60 years, that existed for one reason, so fire trucks could get through if the worst ever happened. I stood at that gate that evening, ran my hand along the cold steel, looked at the concrete bollards, overbuilt, heavy, exactly the kind of thing that would take a cutting crew and hydraulic tools to remove. She'd built it to last. I didn't know it then, but that was going to be the problem. That night I went to the safe in my office closet. Combination lock, fireproof, the same one my father used. Inside was the original property deed, thick cotton paper typed, legal description, the ink fading to brown, but every word legible. Parcel 2714, 12.3 acres. Boundaries described by meets and bounds, with survey markers referenced at every turn. The fire road ran right through the center of it. No ambiguity, no gray area. Underneath the deed, I found the county plat map from when the developer filed for subdivision approval back in 1983. My grandfather's parcel was outlined in red, clearly excluded from HOA common areas. And right there in the surveyor's hand, the fire road was labeled Private Road, Emergency Access. I spread both documents on my kitchen table and stared at them for a long time. 60 years of family ownership, a plat map that said exactly what I'd been saying, black ink on white paper. I made copies the next morning. The following Tuesday, I walked into the HOA board meeting with a manila folder and a purpose. Judith was at her usual spot, head of the table, gavel centered in front of her water bottle on the right, printed agenda on the left. She ran these meetings like depositions. I signed up for public comment. When my name was called, I stood with the folder and held up the deed. This is the original property deed for parcel 2714, recorded in 1962. The fire road runs through the center of my land. Here's the legal description. I read it aloud. The meets and bounds, the boundary markers, the acreage. The room was quiet. A few residents leaned forward. Then I held up the plat map. This is the subdivision plat filed in 1983 when Ridgeline Estates was approved. My parcel is excluded from HOA common areas. The fire road is labeled Private Road Emergency Access, not Community Road, not HOA Road. Private. 2 board members, Carol Angstrom and a younger guy named Pete Dawson, exchanged a glance. Carol opened her mouth like she wanted to say something, then closed it. Judith didn't flinch. "Mr. Morrison, we appreciate you sharing your family memorabilia." She said it the way you'd compliment a child's drawing. "But that deed is 60 years old. The road has been community maintained and community accessed for decades. That creates legal standing." Community maintained. I pulled out a stack of invoices. I've maintained that road every year for 15 years. Gravel delivery, grading, culvert replacement, all paid by me. Every receipt right here. I set the stack on the table. It landed with a thud that made Pete Dawson jump. Judith's expression didn't change, but her hand moved to the gavel. "We'll have our attorney review your claim. Until then, the gate stays and tolls remain in effect. I move to table this discussion." "Seconded," said the board member to her right, instantly like he'd been waiting for the cue. Vote 3-2 to table. Carol and Pete voted against tabling. The other 3 Judith's people shut it down. I gathered my papers and walked out. Behind me I heard Judith say, "Next agenda item," like nothing had happened. The next morning I called Ed Harone, a property attorney 2 towns over. I drove to his office that afternoon with the deed, the plat map, and all 15 years of maintenance invoices. He spread them across his conference table, put on his reading glasses, and spent 40 minutes going through everything. "Your deed is solid," he said. "Plat map is unambiguous, and 15 years of documented maintenance undercuts any adverse possession argument before it starts." He took off his glasses. "But here's the thing. If you go out there and rip that gate down yourself, she'll file a trespass counterclaim. Maybe get a temporary restraining order. It would be satisfying for about 20 minutes, and then you'd be fighting 2 legal battles instead of 1. So what do? We send a formal demand. Give them 30 days to remove the gate. If they don't, we file. I agreed. Ed sent the letter by certified mail. A week later, I got a certified letter back, not from Judith, from the HOA's attorney. The letter stated that the HOA was asserting ownership of the fire road based on, and I had to read this twice, a recently obtained professional boundary survey confirming the road's location within HOA common area. A recently obtained survey? I'd never seen any survey. Nobody had mentioned a survey at the board meeting. My deed and plat map were clear. So where did this survey come from? Before I could even process that, Judith sent a blast email to all 200 households. I got a copy forwarded from Ray. The subject line, "Protecting your community road, the body." One resident is attempting to block community access to our road and eliminate funding for community improvements. The HOA board will protect your rights. Our professional survey confirms the road is HOA common area. The toll system remains in effect. She'd flipped the story. I was the aggressor, she was the protector, and 200 families who didn't know the difference between a deed and a napkin were reading her version first. I sat at my kitchen table that night, looking at my grandfather's deed. The ink 60 years old, the truth right there in front of me, and none of it mattered yet, because Judith Caldwell had an attorney, a board majority, a community email list, and now, apparently, a survey I'd never heard of. Showing the deed wasn't going to be enough. Ed Heron sent a formal discovery demand for the survey. HOA's attorney stalled, still compiling documents under attorney review. Will produce in due course. 2 weeks of nothing. Then it arrived. 14 pages, professional binding, a licensed surveyor's stamp on the cover page, a guy named Glenn Riel out of a firm I'd never heard of. Plat lines, measurements, bearings, the whole thing. It looked legitimate until I put it next to the original. Ed and I spread both surveys on his conference table, the 1983 subdivision plat on the left, Judith's new one on the right. I saw it almost immediately. My western parcel boundary, the one that ran along the ridge, had been shifted east by about 200 feet, just enough to move the fire road out of my property and into a section now labeled HOA common area. 200 feet. Clean, precise, surgical. Look at the reference points, Ed said, tapping the northeast corner of Judith's survey. She shifted your boundary, but she didn't adjust the adjacent markers. These 2 reference pins are now 180 feet apart on her version, and 210 feet apart on the county's. That doesn't happen in real surveying. The math doesn't work. So it's fake. It's based on fake data. Let's find out how fake. Ed called Glenn Riel directly. I sat in the office and listened on speaker. Riel picked up on the 3rd ring, and the moment Ed mentioned the Ridgeline Estates survey, the man's voice changed, got careful, got quiet. I was hired by Miss Caldwell, Riel said personally. She provided existing boundary data and asked me to formalize it into a professional survey document. I used her numbers. Did you do an independent field survey? Ed asked. Long pause. She told me it was for internal HOA planning purposes only. She said field verification wasn't necessary. Mr. Riel, did you go to the site? Silence. I could hear traffic in the background on his end. A car horn. No. Ed muted the phone and looked at me over his reading glasses. She fed him the numbers. He never set foot on your land. He drew a survey based on whatever she handed him and stamped it with his license. I sat back in my chair and stared at the 2 surveys on the table. The real one and Judith's fabrication. A 60-year property boundary redrawn with a phone call and a check. I thought about her standing at that board meeting, dismissing my deed as family memorabilia, knowing the entire time that her claim was built on data she'd invented. This wasn't overreach anymore. This wasn't a power-hungry HOA president pushing boundaries. She'd manufactured evidence, deliberately hired a licensed professional, fed him false boundary data, told him not to verify it in the field, and then presented the result to her board and 200 families as an independent professional survey. Ed unmuted. Mr. Ryle, we'll need a written statement confirming what you've just told us, who hired you, what data was provided, and whether you conducted independent field verification. You may also want to consult your own attorney. The line went very quiet. I could hear Ryle breathing then. Yeah, I think I probably should. Ed hung up and made a note on his legal pad. He'll cooperate. He knows his surveyor's license is on the line if he doesn't. Will his statement hold up? A licensed surveyor admitting he was given false data by a specific individual and told not to verify it. That's not just a statement. That's the beginning of a fraud case. 2 days later, Ed discovered something worse. He'd been checking county records for any recent filings related to my parcel. And there it was. 3 weeks earlier, Judith had filed her doctored survey with the county recorder's office. She attached it to a boundary clarification request, which, if processed and unchallenged, would effectively redraw my property line in the county's system. I stared at the filing record on Ed's computer screen. The filing date was 3 weeks ago, before the board meeting where I'd presented my deed, before the discovery demand. She'd filed it while I was still trying to get a meeting. She's trying to steal my land. She's trying to create a legal cloud on your title, Ed said. He leaned back and rubbed his eyes. If this gets processed before we challenge it, the county's own system will show the fire road as HOA Common Area. We're not just fighting Judith anymore. We're fighting government records, and judges give county records a lot of weight, even when they're wrong. Ed filed an objection with the county recorder that same afternoon, hand-delivered. He also sent a cease and desist to the HOA's attorney by certified mail, demanding immediate withdrawal of the fraudulent filing. But the clerk's office was backed up. The objection would take time to process, weeks, maybe longer. And Judith's filing was already in the queue ahead of it, sitting there like a landmine waiting to be armed. That evening, my phone buzzed. Ray had forwarded another of Judith's blast emails. Subject line, "Great news for our community." I opened it and read it standing in my kitchen. Our professional boundary survey has been filed with the county recorder's office, officially confirming the access road as HOA Common Area. Tolls will continue. Thank you for supporting your community improvements. I set the phone on the counter and looked out the window toward the ridge where the fire road crested the hillside. Somewhere on the other side of that ridge, Judith Caldwell was sitting in her house after she'd filed a fraudulent survey with a government office used a doctored document to justify a toll gate on someone else's land and sent 200 people an email celebrating it. She was racing to make her version of reality permanent before anyone could stop her, and my legal tools, deed plat attorney objection, were all moving at the speed of a county clerk's processing queue. I needed another angle. The call came on a Wednesday morning. Ed's voice was flat, which was never a good sign. The county recorder processed Judith's boundary clarification. It went through before our objection hit the desk. I sat down. What does that mean it means? Right now in the county system, the fire road shows as HOA Common Area. It's not permanent. We can challenge it, file a formal title dispute, take it before a judge. But that process takes months, and until it's resolved, Judith's version is the one on the record. Months. The gate was up. The tolls were flowing. My grandfather's road had someone else's name on it in a government database, and Judith had just won a round I didn't even know we were fighting. She found out fast. Within hours, another blast email. The county has confirmed HOA ownership of the community access road. Case closed. Thank you for your continued support. Case closed. 2 words designed to make 200 people stop thinking. It worked on most of them. The next few days I felt the change. Neighbors who used to wave from their driveways looked the other way. A woman I'd helped jump-start her car last winter crossed the street when she saw me coming. Ray told me he'd overheard a conversation at the mailbox cluster, a woman saying I was trying to take away the community's road for personal gain. Another resident had posted on the neighborhood Facebook group, "Why is one person allowed to hold our community hostage?" A guy I'd known for 10 years. We'd borrowed tools back and forth, watched each other's houses during vacations, stopped me in the grocery store parking lot. He looked uncomfortable, like he'd been working up to this. "Just pay the toll, man. It's $25. It's not worth the fight." "It's my land, Gary." He shrugged. "The county says otherwise now, And she's got that survey. He put his hands in his pockets. I'm just saying sometimes you gotta pick your battles. I stood in that parking lot holding a bag of groceries, watching Gary walk away. And for the first time I felt genuinely alone in this. Not angry, not defiant, just alone. My deed was right. My history was right. 60 years of ownership, 15 years of maintenance receipts, a plat map that said exactly what I'd been saying, and none of it had stopped Judith from putting her name on my land in a county database while 200 neighbors nodded along. Ed's legal path would work, he was sure of it, but sure and soon were two different things, and Judith was operating in the gap between them. That night I sat at my kitchen table staring at the maintenance invoices spread across the surface. 15 years of gravel delivery and culvert repair, my grandfather's deed underneath, and a thought kept circling back, something about the road itself. Not who owned it, what it was. A fire road designated emergency access. That designation was on the original plat. It was on the county's own emergency access route map. And a fire road wasn't just a property question. It was a safety question, a different jurisdiction, a different set of rules. The next morning, I drove to the county fire marshal's office. The building was exactly what you'd expect. Cinder block. Fluorescent lights. A front counter with a woman who looked like she'd been answering the same phone for 30 years. I asked to see the fire access records for Ridgeline Estates. She disappeared into a back room. I waited 15 minutes leaning on the counter, studying a large wall map covered in red and yellow lines. Emergency access routes crisscrossing the county like arteries, each one marked, numbered, and designated. I found Ridgeline Estates on the map, found the red line on the western edge, my fire road. It was right there on the county's own wall, in ink, that had been there for 40 years. The woman came back with a manila folder, thick, slightly dusty, tabbed with colored dividers. She set it on the counter without ceremony. I opened it, right on top. The emergency access route map for Ridgeline Estates, dated 1983, stamped by the County Fire Authority. The fire road through my property was marked in red labeled Designated Fire Apparatus Access Road Secondary. Below the label in smaller type, Mandatory Maintain Unobstructed Access per County Fire Code Section 503. Not optional, not discretionary, not subject to HOA board votes, mandatory. I kept reading. Underneath the map was a letter on County Fire Marshal's office letterhead dated 6 months ago, right around the time Judith had started construction on the toll gate. The letter was a compliance notice addressed to the HOA president at Ridgeline Estates to Judith Caldwell. It stated that the Fire Marshal's office had received reports of potential obstruction on the designated fire access route and reminded the HOA of its obligation to maintain unobstructed emergency access. At the bottom, signed for delivery. Receipt attached. I turned the page. There was the delivery receipt green card signature line, Judith Caldwell's handwriting her signature. She'd signed for this letter 6 months ago. She knew. She knew the fire road was a designated emergency access route. She knew the county fire marshal had flagged potential obstruction, and she built the gate anyway. Then she hid the letter from her own board, from the community, from everyone. I photographed everything. The access route map, the compliance notice, the delivery receipt with her signature, every page. Before I left, I asked the woman at the counter one question. What happens if someone blocks a designated fire access road? She didn't hesitate. Violation notice. If it's not corrected, the marshal can condemn the obstruction and refer for criminal charges. She paused. And any structure that can't be reached by fire apparatus because of that obstruction, that's an uninsurable risk. I walked out into the parking lot. The sun was hitting the asphalt, and I stood there for a minute, holding my phone with those photographs on it. A different jurisdiction, a different enforcement mechanism, and proof in Judith's own handwriting that she knew exactly what she was doing when she blocked that road. I filed a formal request for a fire code inspection the next morning. The fire marshal's office scheduled it for Thursday. Thursday came gray and cool. I was already at the fire road when the marshal arrived. A guy named Tom Braddock, built like a retired lineman. Clipboard in one hand, tape measure in the other. No small talk. He walked straight to the gate. He measured the clearance between the bollards. He tested the card reader. He timed the gate opening 45 seconds from card swipe to full open. Then he stood there, staring at the steel frame like it owed him money. Fire code requires immediate, unobstructed access, he said. This gate takes 45 seconds on a good day. That's not immediate. And these bollards, he kicked one of the concrete posts. Nothing wider than a sedan is getting past these. A fire engine needs a minimum 12-foot clearance. You've got about 8. He clicked his pen and started writing. 3 days later, the HOA received a formal violation notice from the county fire marshal's office. Obstruction of a designated fire apparatus access road. 30-day compliance window. Remove the gate and bollards entirely or face escalating penalties and potential criminal referral. I thought that would end it. Official notice, government authority, 30-day deadline. Even Judith Caldwell couldn't argue with the fire marshal. I was wrong. Judith called an emergency board meeting. I heard about it from Ray. It wasn't on the public calendar, but word got around. By the time I showed up, the meeting was already in progress. Judith was standing at the head of the table, not sitting. Her voice was louder than usual, her gestures wider. She was in full performance mode. The fire marshal is overreacting, she said, and I think we all know who put him up to this. She looked directly at me as I walked in. I took a seat in the back row and said nothing. I've consulted with a gate contractor, she continued. We can install an emergency override, a Knox box with a key for the fire department. The gate stays, the tolls stay, and we're in compliance. Problem solved. Carol Angstrom raised her hand. Judith, the violation notice says remove the gate entirely. The notice says provide unobstructed access. A Knox box provides that. Our attorney agrees. Pete Dawson shifted in his chair. Maybe we should just take the gate down. The fire marshal. The fire marshal doesn't run this community. I do. She caught herself, softened. The board does. And I'm recommending we install the override and respond to the marshal's office with our compliance plan. Vote 3-2. Carol and Pete against. Judith's 3 held. Within a week, a contractor showed up to install a Knox box override on the gate. I watched from my truck parked on my own land about 50 yards away. The installation didn't go well. The gate mechanism was heavy. Judith had overbuilt it. All that steel and concrete designed to be permanent, designed to last, and the electric release on the Knox box couldn't handle the weight smoothly. I sat in my truck with the window down and watched the contractor test it. First try, the override engaged. The motor whined and the gate ground open in about 20 seconds. Slow, but it moved. Second try, the gate lurched, stopped halfway, and the motor made a high-pitched sound that carried across the clearing. The contractor walked over and hit something with the heel of his hand. The gate shuddered and finished opening. Third try, nothing. The motor engaged, but the gate didn't move. A grinding sound, metal on metal, like a garbage disposal eating a fork. The contractor killed the power and stood there with his hands on his hips, staring at the mechanism. He adjusted something inside the housing. Tested again. It opened about 10 inches and jammed hard. He adjusted again. Same result. I could see him talking into his phone, calling someone, probably his office, probably explaining that the gate his client had built was too heavy for the override system she'd approved. He packed up his tools 40 minutes later. The Knox box was mounted on the post. The override was technically installed. The contractor left a service tag on the mechanism that I could read from 30 feet away through my binoculars. Functional. Intermittent delay possible. Intermittent delay on a fire road. That was Judith's version of compliance. I called Tom Braddock and reported what I'd seen. He scheduled a re-inspection, but said it would take about 2 weeks. He had a backlog of commercial inspections ahead of me. 2 weeks. The 30-day compliance clock was ticking, and Judith was betting she could run it out with a cosmetic fix. Meanwhile, Ed Herron called me with something new. I got a copy of the HOA's master insurance policy, he said. Took some doing. They didn't want to produce it, but our discovery demand forced it. What's in it? Turn to the exclusion section, page 43, third paragraph. I found it, read it twice, then read it a third time to make sure I wasn't imagining things. Coverage is void for any loss to insured structures, where the insured party has failed to maintain required fire department access as designated by the local fire authority. Ed, let that sink in. The policy specifically references county fire access route designations, the same designation that's been on your fire road since 1983, the same road Judith blocked with a toll gate. So if something happens to the clubhouse, if fire apparatus can't reach the clubhouse because of that gate, and the clubhouse burns or sustains fire damage, the insurance company has grounds to deny the claim entirely. Not reduce it, deny it. Judith hasn't just blocked your road, Derek. She's voided the HOA's fire coverage for every shared structure in the subdivision. The clubhouse, the pool house, the storage buildings, anything that depends on fire apparatus reaching it through that western access route. I set the policy down on my kitchen table and sat there for a long time. The exclusion clause stared up at me, highlighted in yellow. One paragraph in a document that Judith had probably never read, covering a scenario she'd probably never considered, triggered by an obstruction she'd built with HOA funds on someone else's land. 200 families, 200 homeowners paying HOA dues that funded Judith's tollgate and her pickleball court. And not one of them knew that their president had gambled their insurance coverage they were paying for on a power play she couldn't even legally justify. I needed the homeowners to see this, but Judith controlled the board meetings, the community email list, and the narrative. Getting this information to 200 households without her filtering it, that was the problem I still had to solve. 3 weeks into the compliance window on a Saturday afternoon, the problem solved itself. I was in my garage, sharpening a chain on my backup saw when I heard the first siren. Then a second, then a third, overlapping, getting louder, coming from multiple directions. I walked to the end of my driveway and looked east toward Ridgeline Estates. Smoke, black and thick, rising above the tree line from the direction of the clubhouse. I got in my truck and drove toward County Road 9. By the time I reached the ridge, I could see it, flames pushing through the roof of the clubhouse's east wing. The building sat on the edge of the subdivision, closest to the wooded hillside and closest to my fire road. Old structure, old wiring. Judith had redirected the maintenance budget toward her toll gate and the pickleball court. The electrical system in that kitchen hadn't been updated in 20 years. Dispatch had sent mutual aid. Multiple departments, multiple stations. The clubhouse was large. The wind was pushing toward the tree line and there were homes within 200 yards. This wasn't a one-engine call. 16 engines rolled out. The first two came in through the main entrance on the east side of the residential streets. They made it through, but the residential roads weren't built for heavy apparatus traffic. Parked cars on both sides, tight curves, low-hanging branches snagging antennas. The third engine got stuck behind a delivery truck that couldn't find room to pull over. The fourth had to back up and reroute. Dispatch redirected the remaining units to the western access route. The fire road. My fire road. I was parked on the shoulder of County Road 9 when I saw them coming. Engine after engine, red lights flashing, air horns blasting, rolling down the county road toward the fire road entrance. 14 engines in a line, stretching back around the curve. The first engine reached Judith's gate and stopped. The driver hit the Knox override. The mechanism engaged. The gate moved about 8 inches and jammed. Same failure I'd watched during installation. Same grinding sound. Same dead stop with the gate barely cracked open. The driver tried again. Nothing. The steel gate sat there wedged half closed, the concrete bollards on either side leaving no room to go around. 8 feet of clearance where 12 feet were needed. A fire engine weighs 40,000 pounds, and it wasn't fitting through that gap. Crews jumped out, a captain ran to the gate and tried to manually force it. The steel didn't move. Another crew brought up a set of hydraulic rescue tools, the jaws of life designed for cutting car frames. They started cutting the gate's hinge pins. Behind them, 13 more engines sat idling on the fire road, and County Road 9 red lights reflecting off the trees' radios crackling, smoke rising over the ridge behind the locked gate. I stood on my property about 60 yards from the gate and watched it happen. Everything Judith had built, the steel, the concrete, the card reader, the overbuilt toll system she'd been so proud of, was now the only thing standing between the rest of a 16-engine response and her burning clubhouse. It took 18 minutes to cut through. 18 minutes of chainsaws and hydraulic tools, and firefighters shouting coordinates while black smoke poured over the tree line. 18 minutes during which the fire had the clubhouse east wing all to itself. When the gate finally came apart, metal screaming bolts popping the whole frame, dropping onto the gravel, the engines surged through, one after another. I counted 14 passing my position. They rolled down the switchbacks toward the clubhouse, with their sirens overlapping into one continuous wail. By the time all 16 engines were on scene, the east wing roof had collapsed. I could hear it from the ridge, a deep groan, then a crack that echoed off the hillside. Then the roar of fire finding new air. The crew knocked it down eventually, but the structure was roughly 60% destroyed. 2 adjacent storage buildings caught fire from radiant heat. The wooded hillside behind the clubhouse was scorched black for a quarter acre before they got a line on it. Judith arrived during the cutting. I saw her car, a white Lexus, come screaming up County Road 9 and skid to a stop behind the line of engines. She got out and ran toward the gate, and for the first time since I'd known her, she looked like someone who understood that consequences were real. She saw the firefighters cutting through her gate. She saw the smoke. She saw 14 engines lined up behind the obstruction she'd built, authorized, defended, and faked compliance on. "Just open it," she screamed at the nearest firefighter. "Just open the gate." A fire captain turned to her, soot on his face. "Ma'am, we've been trying to open your gate for 15 minutes. We're cutting it now. Please step back." She turned and saw me standing on my property. The look on her face went from panic to fury in about half a second. "This is your fault," she said. "You did this. You blocked them." I didn't say a word. The gate said everything. Tom Burdock arrived 20 minutes after the fire was contained. He walked the scene with the incident commander, a battalion chief named Reeves from the neighboring county's department. I watched Braddock photograph the destroyed gate, the bollard stumps, the jammed Knox box mechanism. He photographed the line of engine tire tracks on the fire road. He photographed the burned-out clubhouse, the scorched hillside, the damaged storage buildings. Then he stood with Chief Reeves at the incident command post and took the commander's statement. I was close enough to hear Reeves say it. His voice was steady and tired. If those 14 engines had the western access route open, we'd have had full suppression on the structure within 10 minutes of dispatch. We could have saved it. The gate was the bottleneck. 18 minutes of delay on a structure fire. That's the difference between save and loss. Braddock wrote it all down. Every word. An hour later, the scene was winding down. Hoses being racked, engines idling. The clubhouse was a blackened skeleton, still standing on the west end, but gutted. Smoke curled from the wreckage in thin gray lines. Judith stood in the parking lot alone. Her white blouse had ash on it. Her clipboard was nowhere in sight. Braddock walked up to her with a folder. "Miss Caldwell, this is a copy of my incident report. The toll gate you installed on the designated fire access road is identified as the primary obstruction that delayed fire apparatus response to this structure. You'll also find a copy of the compliance notice my office sent 6 months ago, the one you signed for." He handed her the folder. She took it. She didn't open it. "There will be a criminal referral for obstruction of a designated fire access route," Braddock said. "And I'd recommend you contact your insurance carrier soon." He walked away. Judith stood there holding the folder, staring at what was left of the clubhouse she'd redirected budget from maintaining to build a toll gate nobody asked for on a road she didn't own. Pete Dawson walked up to me 10 minutes later. He looked shaken, ash in his hair. His glasses were smudged. "Derek," he paused, swallowed. "She never showed us that letter, the fire marshal's compliance notice. She never brought it to the board. None of us knew." I nodded. Carol Angstrom appeared behind Pete. "We voted for that gate because she told us it was on HOA land. She showed us the survey. We didn't know it was." She stopped, looked at the burned clubhouse. "We didn't know." Behind them, 2 more residents were walking toward me. Then 3 more. The community that had believed Judith's emails was standing in a parking lot full of ash, watching smoke rise from a building their own president had made uninsurable. The gate spoke for itself. The insurance denial came 11 days after the fire. The HOA filed a claim for the clubhouse damage. The adjuster estimated $1.8 million for the structure contents and the 2 storage buildings. It was the kind of number that makes a room go silent. The insurance company reviewed Tom Braddock's incident report. They reviewed the fire access route designation from 1983. They reviewed the compliance notice from 6 months ago, the one Judith signed for and buried. Then they pulled out page 43 of the HOA's master policy. Claim denied. Coverage is void for any loss to insured structures where the insured party has failed to maintain required fire department access as designated by the local fire authority. The exact clause Ed Heron had highlighted on my kitchen table. Word for word, the insurance company cited Braddock's incident report as evidence that the HOA, specifically its president, had deliberately obstructed the designated route despite written warning. They weren't paying. $1.8 million gone. The emergency board meeting happened 1 week after the denial letter went out to all homeowners. This time, the community room was standing room only. Every folding chair filled people lining the walls. The air smelled like coffee and anger. Judith sat at the head table. Same spot, same gavel, but the room was different now. Nobody was checking their phone. Nobody wanted to leave. She tried to call the meeting to order. She tapped the gavel twice. The room didn't quiet down. She tapped it again. Someone in the back said, "Let him talk." I stood up. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I started with the deed, held it up. The same document I'd shown at the first board meeting, the one Judith had called family memorabilia. I read the legal description one more time. The room listened this time. Then the plat map from 1983. Private road emergency access. Then the doctored survey. I put the original and Judith's version side by side on the table and explained the 200-foot boundary shift. I read Glenn Rael's written statement, how Judith had hired him personally, fed him false boundary data, and told him not to do a field survey. Then the fire marshal's compliance notice. I held up the delivery receipt, Judith's signature clear as day. She received this warning 6 months before the fire. She signed for it. She never told any of you. Then the insurance exclusion clause, page 43. I read it aloud and let the silence do the work. I put the papers down. That's it. That's everything. The room was quiet for about 3 seconds. Then it erupted. Carol Angstrom stood up. I moved to remove Judith Caldwell as HOA president, effective immediately. Pete Dawson seconded. Judith's hand went to the gavel. That's not on the agenda. You can't call the vote, someone shouted from the back. The board voted. Carol, yes. Pete, yes. The younger member who'd always sided with Judith looked at the burned clubhouse through the window and raised his hand. Yes. The fourth member, Judith's last reliable ally, stared at the table for a long moment, then nodded. Yes. 4-1. Judith was the lone dissenter. She sat there for a moment, the gavel still in front of her. The room full of people she'd sent triumphant emails to for 2 years. Nobody moved to help her gather her things. Nobody said goodbye. She picked up her water bottle and walked out. The consequences stacked up fast after that. Tom Braddock's incident report triggered a criminal referral for fire code obstruction. The county prosecutor's office opened an investigation. Judith retained a defense attorney, a different one than the HOA's. The county recorder's office now reviewing my title challenge alongside the fire marshal's findings and the surveyor's written statement invalidated Judith's boundary clarification filing as fraudulent. My original deed stood. The fire road was officially re-recorded as part of parcel 2714 Derek Morrison's private property, with a permanent fire access easement registered by the county fire authority. The HOA membership, facing a $1.8 million uninsured loss, filed a civil action against Judith personally. Her decisions as president, based on doctored documents, a suppressed safety warning, and a fraudulent county filing, fell outside the scope of legitimate board authority. The HOA's directors and officers' insurance wouldn't cover her either. Judith put her house in Ridgeline Estates on the market within the month. I heard it sold at a loss. Nobody on the street organized a going-away party. 2 months after the fire, the county installed official fire access route markers at both ends of my road. Red and white metal signs bolted to steel posts, Fire Access Road, No Obstruction, County Fire Authority. I stood there and watched the county crew drill the posts into the ground, right where Judith's concrete bollards used to be. I paid for fresh gravel that week, had a crew come out and regrade the whole half-mile switchback's covert shoulders. The road hadn't looked that good in years. A few neighbors came by while the crew was working. Ray brought a six-pack. A woman I'd barely spoken to brought a card signed by about a dozen families. I opened it standing on the fire road. Thank you for keeping the road open. We should have listened sooner. I didn't frame it. I put it in the filing cabinet next to the maintenance invoices and my grandfather's deed. That evening I drove to the top of the fire road, where it crests the ridge before the switchbacks down to the valley. Same spot my grandfather stood when he first cut through the brush with a borrowed dozer 60 years ago. The sun was getting low, throwing long shadows across the gravel. I could see the whole valley below the rooftops of Ridgeline Estates, the gap where the clubhouse used to be, the new growth already pushing up on the scorched hillside. The road ran clean from the ridge to the valley floor open clear, the way it was supposed to be. I put the truck in park, killed the engine, and sat there for a while. Wind through the pines, gravel settling under the tires, the kind of quiet that comes after something finally ends. This road stays open,